Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Ben. In rewatching all the prequels again in research for our previous video series, it got me thinking about the Jedi way and how it's influenced by several real-world Asian religions, with a bit of the chivalry of European knights thrown in there too. In fact, there are stories connected with Buddhism that appear to influence other aspects of the plot as well. But let's start with the Jedi. The Jedi philosophy is actually a combination of Chinese Taoist and also Buddhist beliefs, mostly from the Japanese Zen sect. The idea of the Force is based on the Taoist idea of Qi, a mystical energy contained in all things in the universe, and also the balancing of the two opposing forces of yin and yang, just like the light side and the dark side of the Force. The idea of compassion in the Jedi way also comes from Buddhism, as does the idea of giving up one's attachments and possessions, something Anakin is pretty useless at, and his attachment to love ultimately leads to his downfall.
Attachment is forbidden. Possession is forbidden. Compassion, which I would define as unconditional love, is central to a Jedi's life.
Don't fall for him, Padme! And speaking of Padme, there are some similarities between her story and that of the Dalai Lama, the Tibetan Buddhist leader who's been exiled in India since 1959. Let's first look at her name, Queen Amidala. The name Amidala actually contains all the letters of the title Dalai Lama. It also sounds very similar to the name Amitabha, the name of another Buddha not related to Tibetan Buddhism, but still too much of a similarity to ignore. Her first name, Padme, also appears to come from a Tibetan Buddhist chant, Om Mani Padme Hum. Padme actually means lotus, a flower that is associated with the journey of Buddhist enlightenment. The way a beautiful pure lotus emerges from a muddy pond is kind of a metaphor for the way Buddhist monks achieve enlightenment and spiritual perfection out of the muddy human world. Like the Dalai Lama, Padme became leader of her people when she was very young and also had to immediately deal with an invading army. With the Dalai Lama, it was the Chinese communists. With Padme, it was the Trade Federation, who, despite their accents sounding more Japanese than Chinese, are thought to represent the Chinese People's Liberation Army invading Tibet in the early 1950s. And the fact that the Trade Federation are taking orders from Palpatine has led some to point out that they think Palpatine actually represents the Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong. Mao presided over a communist party that would play one faction off against each other in order to mass political power for itself, kind of similar to the way Palpatine plays the Trade Federation off against his own planet Naboo in the Senate.
I must be frank, Your Majesty, there is little chance the Senate will act on the invasion.
Gets his prospective new apprentice to kill his old apprentice.
Kill him. Kill him now.
Tricks Anakin into joining the Sith.
Become my apprentice. Learn to use the dark side of the Force.
I will do whatever you ask.
All to amass power for himself. The Chinese Communist Party throughout the last 100 years have also opposed and persecuted pretty much all Buddhist practices. Padme and the Dalai Lama also both faced the dilemma of whether to stay in their country or flee and look for support for their people from outside. Both chose to flee. The Trade Federation tried to force an agreement on Naboo, and the Chinese Communists tried to force the so-called 17-point agreement on the people of Tibet. On Naboo, we also see a swamp area where Padme strikes a deal with the Gungans that's definitely based off of Angkor Wat, a Buddhist temple complex in Cambodia that features ruins of Buddha statues with trees growing around them, very similar to the giant heads under these trees in The Phantom Menace. Indiana Jones' Temple of Doom was actually filmed at Angkor Wat as well, and that's a movie that George Lucas co-wrote and was executive producer for. Going back to the Jedi, the selection process for new Jedi is very similar to that of Tibetan Buddhist lamas. Both have to be selected very young and also have to pass some tests that prove some sort of supernormal ability. In the case of lamas, they often have to identify possessions of the previous lama with no prior knowledge. In the case of Anakin, he had to identify objects on a screen without looking. In The Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon Jinn often mentions the idea of mindfulness, which is a concept from Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism also focuses on nothingness, gaining without pursuit, and paradoxical riddles to enlighten its practitioners, like this.
What's the sound of one hand clapping?
Piece of cake.
No, Bart, it's a 3,000-year-old riddle with no answer. It's supposed to clear your mind of conscious thought.
Okay, that probably wasn't the best example. How about this?
If a tree falls in the woods and no one's around, does it make a sound?
Absolutely.
But Bart, how can sound exist if there's no one there to hear it?
Ooh.
Ah, that's better. These paradoxes sound kind of similar to the words Yoda mutters when training Luke on Dagobah.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
All right, I'll give it a try.
No, try not. Do. Or do not. There is no try.
So why did George Lucas include all these references? Well, he was actually inspired by many religions in creating the Jedi. Is he a Buddhist himself? Well, you can take him at his own words. I was raised a Methodist. Now let's say I'm spiritual. It's Marin County. We're all Buddhists up here. As long as he's not a Scientologist, it's okay with me. So guys, I hope you found that interesting. We do actually have another video pointing out how George Lucas was inspired by Asian culture in creating Star Wars. It's not just about religion, but also about sort of artistic and cultural aspects as well. I'll put the link to that video on the end of this video and in the description. You guys can check it out if you're interested in that. Please leave your comments and thoughts below. If you're new, please subscribe, give this video a like, and if you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.